Let me start with my overall game plan of what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make. Historically, special interests were seen as almost unfathomable, just very unusual and odd. There was then an attempt to normalize them, which I've participated in and approve of, which is trying to show special interest as being on a continuum with the hobbies and interests of neurotypicals. And I want to actually share a sort of newer view, which is that special interests are intellectually awesome. They're not circumscribed or narrow, but they're wide ranging. So let me get into it. A background to this is going to be quite well known to this audience. There's many aspects of autism which have both a sort of two ends of the continuum. Examples would be we have intellectual disability, but also savantism. There can be things like insistence on sameness, but also the chaos of turbulent meltdowns, odd preoccupations, but also scientific discoveries. If we think about some of the historical inventors and scientists who are believed to have been on the autism spectrum. I participated in trying to take the strength-based approach of suggesting that autistic special interests are not so other or alien at all. And that can fit in with the idea of autism as not so alien. It's more like depression or anxiety. Classic autism, now we know, not the most common type with expansion of the spectrum to include individuals with typical intellectual ability. So now in the 2020s, almost 60% of people with autism do well in school, hold down jobs, still navigate sensory and social atypicality as well as of types of executive function difficulties. It's outside the scope of my talk today, but I am going to just briefly get into this idea of why does the phenotype exist in the gene pool. The idea is that it possibly conferred reproductive fitness during human evolution. Things like do-it-myself tinkering is a way for our ancestors to have solved problems by systemizing the natural world, having an intense focus on sort of objective reality, not getting bogged down in social infighting, social status, hierarchy, backstabbing, and so-called Machiavellian intelligence. Let me get into the current arguments. What are special interests? Historically, they were labeled restricted and circumscribed. The examples I hear are, of course, going to be familiar to the ASHA attendees. Very, very fixed and narrow, like having a specific interest in World War II biplanes, things with many moving parts, washing machines. A 4-year-old had to climb every new stairway for 15 minutes, so special interests can overlap with actually physical repetitions. In my earlier work and ongoing, I've tried to eavesdrop on people with autism and autistic people discussing their own intellectual and their own special interests by analyzing online forums that are devoted to people with autism. These are specifically for autistic people. I use qualitative and quantitative analysis to understand the types of special interests, their range, their frequencies, anything else that people are discussing about them. I specifically looked for anything that would substantiate ideas about the purpose of special interests. The key ideas out there right now in the literature are that they are serving purposes of self-regulation and escaping demands. I'm going to see if any of the posters discuss that, but also look for do special interests provide opportunities for systemizing and knowledge acquisition? So let me get into here this piece on the questions that were on the discussion board. Here's the discussion boards I used and the specific threads or specific forums within platforms. Reddit is a platform, Wrong Planet is a platform. I also, so you can see some of the titles here. What are your special interests at the moment? Anyone else really embarrassed about their special interests, and so on. So when I analyze these both quantitative and qualitatively, one thing that struck out at me is a quality I'm calling wide-ranging intellectual appetite. This is defined as the presence of 4 or more knowledge-heavy interests from different intellectual domains. Here's an example from one adult autistic woman. The domains that I categorized her interest in were science, hair and makeup, clothing is a domain, gastroanthropology a domain, and video games. So let's look. I have her post edited down a bit, but I've extracted out important parts here. She discusses how as a child, fairies, being a stolen fae, history, reading, art, witchcraft, these are not that unusual. And this fits with a sort of a new approach to special interest, which is that particularly in women, the interest can seem somewhat gender and age appropriate. So we'll see that in some of this woman's interests. So as a teen, astronomy, art, witchcraft, sewing, and cooking. Again, could look, certainly overlaps with neurotypical interests. As a young adult, she earned a BFA, BS Ed, and became hyper fixated on learning how to do everything an Iron Age person could do, e.g. smelt iron, raku pottery, weaving, building wattle and daub, etc. I earned astronomy and fiber arts minors and was obsessed with knitting and spinning sheep to shawl. I grew my own flax to spin into linen and learned a lot of practical skills like sewing, mending, and cooking. So here we're really starting to see what I'm calling that wide-ranging intellectual interest. As an adult, those interests continue, and you see a lot of many different areas of interest: science, makeup, artistry, vintage hairdressing, vintage clothing. More recently, Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing. Those are video games. Cruise ships. She does a WTF because she herself is surprised. Why does that fit in with her other interests? And collecting gastroanthropology primary sources. So that's where that's an example of the type of post that really grabbed me, with the idea of the wide-ranging intellectual interests. So my claim is special interests are not narrow and circumscribed. But I want to document this. This is hardly a single post. About 25% of all posts a quarter had 4 or more of these diverse domains. Here's my categorization just on my topic analysis, where I'm just categorizing what the interests are. The thing that is really impressive is the preponderance of intellectual topics. So the top 4 academic, so I categorized the academic topics into 4 categories. These categories are fairly recognizable. They sort of, I divided the categories into sort of what made sense in terms of the distribution of interest. The most frequent topic is the scientific approach to psychology, neurology, sociology, and autism itself. 29% of respondents mentioned having one of these interests. Here are some examples: human sexuality, cults, narcissism, of course, autism itself. 20% interested in broad sciences and medicine, all types of sciences, biology, microbiology, healthcare. Almost 20% interested in history, culture, and literature. Obviously, when we get, some of these were, of course, quite specific. These are just the general labels: ancient civilizations, Africa, Scotland, Thailand. Ancestry was common, and interested in linguistics and languages is also quite common and led to a lot of enthusiasm and sharing. Not surprisingly, almost half the corpus listed some form of entertainment. We are all humans and interested in entertainment. One thing that was quite novel was just how many people mentioned the very specific type of entertainment called true crime. And I have some wonderful quotes here from people describing why they're interested in true crime. And the explanation is that true crime lets people, well, it offers systemizing. First of all, I should say that all of these domains allow the whole extracting of regularities. All scientific domains allow the extracting of regularities, trying to find the different components of a system, trying to build theories, trying to build explanations. So true crime does a lot of that. It has these different components to it that are really interesting. You can just try to, first of all, of course, imagine the horror that this would happen to you, that you might be a victim. But the autistic people, mostly almost exclusively women in this category, were interested in understanding the mind, understanding the killer's or the criminal's brain. And it seemed to be, I'm speculating, that true crime is so riveting because it will offer so many different dimensions, but also offers that dimension of learning about human psychology, learning about human motivations, learning about human social interactions. So a lot of the interest in people and celebrities, same thing. Had one post was a woman who was very interested in astronauts, and she actually just admitted straight out what she really liked about the John Glenn story was not all the space science, but actually learning about his family and all the sort of background that had to do with the family involvement of that astronaut and other astronauts. Not surprisingly, people interested in leisure activities. These items here are obviously overlap with neurotypical interest. Lots of interested in animals, and animals often were used as again, venues for systemizing. All aquariums in particular is sort of an interesting one. The thing that is so great about aquariums is how much they offer. They're not just pets, but they're scientific. You can taxonomize them. You can have different components of the aquarium. You can watch and regard them. So aquariums are an example of how animals afford sort of this wide-ranging intellectual interest of getting interested in all the different components. One thing that was quite interesting is that even when the posters picked topics that weren't specifically intellectual, they would want to take a whole knowledge, what I call knowledge seeking, a whole way of getting into the topic that involved a lot of systemizing, a lot of analysis, a lot of figuring out. So one woman described her interest as bread making and the science behind it. And she said, put Lowell, and then said it infuriates people, and kind of laughed about that. And I guess the idea is people are just amazed that she would get so into and be so absorbed by the science of bread making. So that could be categorized as a non-intellectual topic because it's a cooking topic, but not an academic topic, but she's taking an intellectual approach to the topic. So to try to bolster my case that special interests are about knowledge seeking, I did a very fine and detailed quantitative analysis of words used. And so I categorized, these are the percent of posts. Half the posts, 52%, had one or more of these terms. So, for example, it might not look a lot like, well, 1% of posts had the words analyzed, 4% of the posts had the words brain, but these are usages that are a lot higher than just the incidence of these words in the normal population. And also, this is a way that autistic special interests are more like intellectually oriented and intellectually wide-ranging than neurotypical hobbies, because we don't see neurotypical special interests focusing on the words learn, read, science, research, study, brain, write, figure, facts, knowledge. So another big component of special interest was the intensity with which these interests are described. And this is well known in the literature, and there's even a movement to replace the phrase special interest with the term intense interest, because now special interest now seems to may have a pathologizing component to it. I've read multiple discussions about this, and plenty, the majority of autistic people who are posting about labels prefer the term special interest, but there is, of course, variance in what people like. But to get onto this intensity thing, the word love used 17%. You can see here the list here: obsess, 8%, rabbit hole, focus, super, fascinate, binge, hooked, and so on. Now, in contrast, remember, people are talking about their interests. They're not talking about interests as venues for socializing. And as I argued in my prior work, this is one of the main ways that special interests for autistic adults differ from hobbies and interests of neurotypicals. Hobbies and interests of neurotypicals are overwhelmingly venues for socializing. Neurotypicals want to have interests that can bring them together with other people. So the interests are usually not specific. They are broad. Interests of neurotypicals are broad on purpose because you want to use them as venues for meeting other people, sharing and enjoying making your social connections, having your social life. So the top interests for neurotypicals are sports, music, eating out, cooking, and the type of entertainment that you can share with other people. The autistic posters did not discuss those things. So friend is mentioned, the word friend was mentioned 10% of the time, but you can see social, share, bond. Words relating to socializing were only 6% of the corpus. Similarly, the autistic individuals did not talk about their post as purposes of self-regulating. These words did occur, of course. There was about 4% of posts did talk about escape, it calms me down, or when I'm stressed, or I do it to relax. But these are very, very low mentions of these purposes. Career was also fairly small, though of course almost 10% people did talk about their special interest being their career. Now, I want to, before I conclude, I want to just draw your attention to one other thing about, this is sort of part of my grand theory of the aspects of the spectrum that theorists aren't attending to. So I want to orient you to this graph here. My proposal is that I want to explain why, when you have autism with intellectual disability, we do see circumscribed interest, very narrow interest, very intense. We don't see the wide-ranging intellectual interest that we see, of course, with individuals with normal intellectual ability who are posting to forums. So here's my idea. My idea overall is that an aspect of autism is knowledge seeking. Baron Cohen's called it pattern seeking. We're sort of talking about the same thing. I think that pattern seeking, the phrase pattern seeking, continues to be a little bit of pathologizing and a deficit approached, whereas knowledge seeking, I think, is more appropriate to people with normal intellectual abilities. This hunger for knowledge, this wanting to go after knowledge, that's what my analysis showed. So let's say we have knowledge seeking. When you have intellectual ability is a disability. So I want to show this graph is what I talk about when your brain is set up to prioritize knowledge seeking and you have intellectual disability. That brain that is hungry to seek knowledge can't do very much because of intellectual disability. You can, the individual can grab some objects and manipulate them in every different directions, get an object, just try to analyze it intensely, go over and over again. But because of lack of intellectual ability, you can't start showing the wide-ranging interest that the people on the autism forums are displaying. However, once your intellectual ability gets high, now you have the phenotype that I'm calling prioritized knowledge seeking. Now you really can have that fantastic wide-ranging breadth of special interests. So what's going on with neurotypicals? This is my line for neurotypicals. Neurotypicals, their brain, our brain, neurotypicals' brain is set up to prioritize attending to knowledge and the social agenda. Neurotypicals have both. Neurotypicals want to have social lives, want to have interests that connect with social others. Neurotypicals also seek knowledge. Okay, that's part of being human. And so what's going on with neurotypicals is as you go from disabled, and by neurotypicals, I mean people who don't have the autism phenotype, don't have the autism drive for knowledge seeking. Disability could be a mental retardation or some other non-autistic form of mental retardation. What you have here is when you have low intellectual ability, you have low interests. And as you get high ability, then you can have a more diverse interest. But the neurotypical breadth of interest at the high ability end is lower than what we see with autistic individuals. So autistic individuals have this U-shaped curve. This explains where at high ability level, you have autistic individuals with a huge variety of interests. So just in my remaining minutes here, let me just kind of wrap it up and give you my overall conclusion. The topics and intellectual curiosity that we see in autistic people with normal intellectual ability are on a continuum with the scholarly pursuits of college professors and scientists, but if anything, they're more wide-ranging than that. And they also, people who have that knowledge-seeking phenotype also try to sort of take even a non-intellectual topic like pets, aquariums, plants, cooking, entertaining shows, wanting to systemize shows. They do the knowledge seeking even when they aren't interested in a specifically intellectual topic. Thank you very much. I appreciate you listening.